So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Donald Farmer, the wizard of data analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, who's been a great advisor to us, and I've learned an enormous amount from him. So Donald is going to moderate this panel. Donald, welcome to the stage.
Great. Well, it's fantastic to be here. I've enjoyed the conference tremendously right up until this point. And it's a great honor to be introducing our panel discussion today. We're going to be talking about how data drives value, and I think that's a really important subject, as you saw from the Insights application. It's all about how data can actually drive some of the decisions that we're making. And we've got a great panel to discuss this today. In addition to Philip, who you know, of course, we have David. David Childers from the Ethics and Compliance Institute, VP of founder of there. 25 years experience in this space, so he's going to be a tremendous contributor to this discussion. We have Michal Majkowski from Philip Morris International. Michal has flown in from Switzerland for this conference. It makes him one of the few people who's adapting to a lower altitude. We have Alan Gibson, who's an Assistant General Counsel for Legal Compliance at Microsoft, which means in my 10 years at Microsoft, he was literally the second last person I wanted to talk to. But that was my loss, because he's very insightful about the role of analytics and compliance in our business. So with that, I think we can get this discussion started. We've got some basic questions set out. But one of the things I want to ask, and with David, with his experience in this field of 25 years of working here, and seen no doubt many changes in that time, how has data changed what we do in this space?
Well, I mean, as you guys saw this morning, one of the things that data does is that I think everybody's become far more data-driven, right? I mean, so the expectation is in anything that you do that you should understand what your data is and how you're being able to use it. If you're not using it, as you saw this morning from what Philip was saying, you're probably not taking a competitive advantage, you're not taking good use to that. I mean, very honestly, if you guys go back 25 years, nobody was collecting data because the systems weren't built that way. It's only right now that we really have enough data to really begin to be meaningful. I think that we're on the precipice of being able to really take advantage of that data in ways that we haven't yet seen. And there's so many things, as we were talking about earlier this week, processing power is so much more available to us today than when we were all trying. At least let me put my age cap on for a second and say when I was trying. Now we've got more power on our phones than we used to have on a floor in one of the rooms. So data is incredibly important, but also your insights as to how to gather, decipher, and deploy that information is incredibly important. So the data is coming, but your maturity to the data is very, very important.
I think that's important, and you were saying about data is much more available. Of course, we all talk about big data, and we have representatives of two very large companies. Is there a risk of having too much data? I mean, how do you handle the volume of data that's involved in this?
Yeah, for us, you hear Michael Silver talk about separating the signal through the noise, and where we really have started is having a concrete idea of what sort of questions we wanted to ask from the data, and then start to match up the specific attributes that we thought may help us answer those questions. It's a first step, and then we supplement it with additional data that may give us even more robust answers. But it is separating that signal from the noise.
We as a company, consumer goods company, manufacturer, have a very simple product, but we do collect a lot of information, and we also recognize the need to actually look at this data and basically segregate it. Think about it, how we're using it, and be much smarter about it. That's why one of the big initiatives within Philip Morris International is launch of Enterprise Data Analytics Group that ultimately has a challenge of basically scrubbing all the information and determining how we're going to use this in the future.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, when you talk about scrubbing the data and bringing it together, this is actually really important because although we have a lot of data, that doesn't mean that the data is fit for purpose just in the form that it's already in. So data has to be brought together, integrated, and cleaned up in order to be analyzed. And in order to do that, you then have to have some idea of what it is, what questions you want to ask for the data. The work that you do to clean it and prepare it has to have some end in mind. Now, one of the ways in which you might do that is to have a very clear idea of the analytics that you want to perform, or at least of the problems that you want to solve. And Alan, in your case, one of the things that Microsoft is looking at are things like deal risk and building some sort of early warning system for compliance issues. Can you give us some idea of how that might work and what would be involved?
Yeah, the path that we're on is, we talked about making better use of our data, and several years ago we were challenged with, from the top, from our executives, about leveraging our strength in big data and data analytics. Not surprising coming from Microsoft, but what does that actually mean? And so our group was challenged to go, okay, what problems are we actually trying to solve? What opportunities may be out there? And so we take a risk-based approach, and we decided that one of our most significant risks has to do with our business model. The way that we sell our products, relying on a network of representatives selling not just in North America, but in a lot of high-risk countries, creates a corruption risk for us. So our theory was that we should have the ability to aggregate a bunch of our data across a variety of systems and basically risk score all of our deals. And so what we've actually created by looking at not just the location of where a transaction is taking place, the size, the sorts of incentives, who's involved in the deal. We aggregate all of this data from disparate systems and then create a risk score for a deal, 0 to 100 across our business. And above a certain threshold, we then provide additional compliance oversight to it. Right now, it's serving as this monitoring function so we can identify risky deals after we have entered into them, but we're quickly moving to a place that we're scoring these deals before we enter into them. So as data gets added to our systems, what we're allowed to do is identify a risky deal before we enter into it. Risky deal doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. Just means we should provide some additional oversight to it and actually prevent the misconduct, help the employees do the right thing as we work our way through it.
That sounds really interesting. And Philip, as listening to this about how data is prepared and how that can actually be used as a product leader, what are your thoughts on that? Does this ring bells for you?
Yeah, no, this is obviously something that's core to what we believe in and where we see ethics and compliance going. I think, Donald, you used the phrase yesterday, everybody's a data company today. And if you don't realize that, you're making a mistake, because all your businesses, whether you're in manufacturing, retail, education, whatever it is, you're generating enormous amounts of data. And it's a bit like leaving the lights on in the house when you go to bed. If you're not gathering that data, you're wasting it. You're letting it run away. So you need to capture it. I don't think there is such a thing as too much data. Now that we have the technology at a very cost-effective place to be able to digest that data and use machine intelligence to consume it, you should take all the data you can get your hands on, because that's going to give you the insights. And productizing that obviously is something that I'd love to do, and show how we can then deliver that back to you in a consumable form within Convercent. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that I want to make sure that everybody is thinking about data, I think the way that we think about data, but we've spent a lot of time talking about this. So a lot of the things that you see are statistical data of things that have occurred in the past, right? I mean, and you're looking at those trends and the data points associated with that. What Alan and I have been working on independently, ECI also has a data analytics project underway. We're both looking at predictive analytics, right? So we're looking at not only taking the data that is the data that has occurred, so that we actually understand the data, we understand those trends, we understand the significance of all of these action points. But to Alan's point, they're beginning to look at things that have given them heartburn perhaps in the past, and beginning to say, when are Are they occurring now? Are they about to occur in the future? So that you take compliance and the role of the ethics and compliance officer away from being always hair on fire reactive and starting to move into this proactive realm. That's the holy grail, is getting us to the place where we can actually become proactive in the business transactions and the activities that are going on.
Yeah.
And just to add one more thing to what Philip said, when you collect the data, the more data points you have, the more accurate your predictions will be. The more information you can connect to your system, the more accurate you're going to be.
And don't kid yourself. I mean, everybody in this room is saying, hey, I'm not a data analyst. I don't know anything about big data. Actually, that's wrong. You guys know your business better than anybody else. So there is nobody better to look at the data, to look at these trends. Yeah, you may need some help to clean it and to organize it and stuff, but you guys have more capability to analyze this data than you give yourself credit for.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. One of the key things I've done in my career when I've been building analytic products is trying to get them into the hands of business users who don't necessarily think of themselves as analysts. And a lot of that comes down to just bringing the analytics into the operational applications or into the business scenarios where you're already working. So rather than it being some special thing that you do. So I could absolutely imagine, for example, this deal score that Alan was talking about. You get a risky deal that's 80 or 90%. And that's doesn't mean you don't do it. It just means you have to take special care. There's no reason why that deal score then couldn't be pumped out over your mobile application, sent out to someone and say, you're working on a deal which looks a little risky. There are some special things you should take account of. That's analytics, but it's analytics literally in your hand, and it's analytics in the business situation that you're working in. And I think those, that ability to bring analytics into the business scenarios is going to be really critical. Michal, when you're looking at your analytics priorities at PMI, at Philip Morris, could you tell us a little bit about that, what your priorities are?
So to understand what our priorities are, I have to sort of explain a little bit about our program. A couple of years ago, we went away from basically looking at misconduct from perspective of detecting, deterring it, and then basically punishing people, to now basically understanding, predicting, and controlling. The ultimate goal of ours is to basically investigations be more of a secondary thing for our department. The primary one would be to understand the human behavior and what we can expect from them. That's why we believe in basically looking at our data, looking at the things like root cause analysis, whether it's an internal or an external factors, and getting ahead of it through basically launching specific campaigns where we believe there is a potential for misconduct, adjusting our training to basically inform people what to do, give them ability to basically stop what they're doing, think about it, and then make a decision instead of being reactive and investigating their misconduct because they did not have the proper information. And that's the ultimate goal of our data analytics. That's where we want to be. We're not there yet. We are actually far away from it, to be perfectly honest, in a sense of being able to develop meaningful predictive analytics. That's why we believe that there's a potential for creating and sharing information between different compliance departments through sanitizing it. Right now, we're dealing with about 800 cases a year. It is very difficult to get a meaningful prediction out of that volume. If you multiply this by 100, all of a sudden you're talking about sizable amount of misconduct. You're talking about misconduct that hasn't realized in your organization. And that's why we strongly believe that there's a potential for developing advanced analytics, if not predictive analytics for compliance.
So, and I think that's fascinating, but at the back of my mind, I've also got a concern about it. And I think my concern is the kind of minority report scenario where, we've done all this scoring of potential risk, we've done all this scoring of predictive analytics, we understand where potential problems could occur. Is there a danger that we start actually predicting and the predictions itself become non-compliant because they've got the biases of human beings built into them?
We're not kidding ourselves. We're not looking here to basically identify that John Smith in Chicago, Illinois, on June 27, 2018, is gonna basically sell his computer on a black market to get extra cash. You know, we're not going after that. We know that this is not something that we even want. We know that we want to be able to predict certain patterns and behavior to adjust our training. The other aspect that is important in this is the human factor that we already talked about it.
Right.
You can have those predictions, but at the end, a human being needs to make a decision what to do with it. And that's how we see this.
So it's more generalized. It's not as specific as saying Alan Gibson's in Denver during Oktoberfest. There's an alarm going off in his office.
That's definitely not the intent of ours. I'm not sure about others.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because there's been more than once, because we do similar work with our investigations data, that it's been you're like the Tom Cruise character in Minority Report, and the first thing is always like, no. I'm saying I can predict the future, not see the future. And I'm not saying I can predict it that accurately, but the way that we go through it is we look for swaths in the demographics of the data. And what I mean by that is, again, I'm not looking for Donald Farmer on his trip. What I'm looking for is somebody that's been at the company 10 years, has a higher risk of a certain type of misconduct based on the data, so that when I find a population of those sorts of people somewhere in the company, we can go out with targeted training. Or it could be like the demo there, when somebody gets promoted, based on the data, I know that this sort of misconduct happens at a higher rate when somebody gets promoted to a certain level.
I mean, we've seen that in our data with our customers, where you see things that you actually know intuitively, like a young manager with young employees is going to lead to problems, potentially, or is higher risk. So although it's not the individual that you're saying you're going to do it, but you are at higher risk from it. And so the question is how you deal with that. Yes, it gets a little Minority Reportish in the sense of, do you go around and fire everybody who's high risk to get the risk out of your organization? Maybe you do, but that's your problem. I think the right answer is, if you understand risk, you then can apply the program more effectively. And when you look at compliance programs today, many of them are defensive. They're pushing out the same policy, the same training to everybody.
Right.
This allows you to go on the offense of saying, this very small group here are high risk, so therefore I can target my program around those individuals. It's much more cost effective because you are predicting that there's a high likelihood that one of this group could cause a problem.
Yeah, I think that you guys are all going to hear from this that we're all approaching it slightly differently, because we're in the Wild Wild West, or we're in the frontier. ECI has taken a totally different approach. Not that we don't disagree with what Alan is talking about, but Alan's looking at it from a transaction perspective. We're looking at it from a cultural perspective. ECI has been running cultural surveys for over a decade. And we begin to look at the way in which the organization, the pulse of the organizational culture. It goes back to a 10, 12-year-old study that was done. The CIA said, this is what pathological behavior looks like. There's 3 to 5% of the people are going to steal from you at any opportunity that they can. And 15 to 17% of the people would never steal from you. And everybody in the middle is influenceable, right? So they're influenced by stresses and pressures and activities and opportunity, right? And to Philip's point, if you begin, we've gone further a little bit in the fact that we can look closer with our data analytics. We can look more at geographies. We can look at lines depending on your organization. If you're a manufacturer, we can look at certain levels of your organizational chart, or looking at middle management, and begin to understand that there's stresses on middle management. That drives two reactions. One is to give them encouragement, right? That's a simple email to everybody there that's just basically reminding them to do the right thing. And the other is to proactively get out and start pressing a little flesh, or encouraging people to speak up, so that you can begin to understand what's going on. Regardless, we're trying to move compliance. I think all of us are trying to move compliance into a proactive step, that we're actually moving toward the fire, not chasing the fire after it's broken out.
Just to add one point on that, the cultural side, I thought, yesterday Renee talked about brand resilience. And I think what is cultural resilience, right? Yeah. How much can your culture withstand what's going on around it, because there are things, M&A activity creates dissonance and problems. So understanding those impacts and being able to manage them and be proactive about it helps make your culture more resilient.
Right, and I mean, a more resilient culture, right, provides itself to be a more ethical or a better compliant culture.
Given that understanding of how your culture can potentially affect the propensity of people to have problems, what do you think is the role of, say, data and analytics in helping to change that culture?
Well, I don't know that so let me say that I don't know that the analytics will change anything. I think that analytics give us insight, right? I mean, right. I'm going to bore everybody with something you already know, but the fact of the matter is we take data and turn it into knowledge. We take knowledge, we turn it into information, information becomes knowledge becomes power, right? I mean, that's the goal of analytics, is ultimately to take that data to where you have something actually meaningful that you can do with it, that you can actually take you can make an informed business decision because the data is guiding you in the proper way. Same thing happens with your culture. As we're measuring impulses of culture and we begin to understand more about the organization itself, and that's the key. This goes back to what Alan is studying. If I don't know the behavioral history, the problems that the organization has gone through, if I don't understand the M&A activity, if I don't understand all of that, and then I'm just trying to look at the data, it's not going to be as beneficial. I have to start blending those points together to begin to say, my culture is facing this problem because of these stresses or pressures. Now, how do I go in and lower those stresses? How do I get people more comfortable in that environment? How do I make, I think to Philip's point, how do you make somebody more aware? Just the simple thing that you were talking about a moment ago of when the guy gets off the plane and he knows he's there, a simple reminder that to do the right thing is all we're really saying, is a very powerful mission because it's at the point of need, right? And I think that's where the data really begins to help you.
Right, so I think that's really important. Data and analytics itself is not a magic bullet. It's not going to solve these problems on its own. It's an input.
Yeah, exactly. And just to give you guys a real life example, in two of our markets, different period of time, we noticed that our sales force independently in different parts start getting involved in fraud. Without certain data and without the analysis, we would have simply, under our previous approach, just fire everybody. I mean, fire everybody who was involved in it. And that's not what we want to do thanks to behavioral science and collecting certain pieces of information. We've done additional studies on both cases. We took a look at the factors, and in one case, turned out that in this particular country, people were getting their mortgages in certain currency, and when that currency fluctuated, it led them to basically involve in a misconduct because their paycheck couldn't cover their mortgage. So we as a company in this situation ended up bringing financial advisors, helping them out, basically plan better and get out from under that problem. In the other market, where problem was exactly the same, we ended up looking at this, and it turned out that basically the goals that were set up in that market were unachievable. Simply because in addition to certain sales requirements, they also had to make certain amount of stops. The distance between the stops was so great that they couldn't actually fit that into their schedule. Once again, by doing this and performing this level of analysis, we were able to go to the management team in that market and basically say, take a look at your compensation scheme and adjust it, because you will never ever have a situation where people will not look for ways to get around it. And that's the big aspect of data, and that's the big aspect of data analytics, especially if you want to use this behavioral approach in your program.
Does this behavioral approach make sense in the Microsoft context?
Yeah, it does make sense. The one thing to build on that I want to make sure that we hit on is, as we collect this data and we come up with these actionable insights, The technology and the analytics is really amazing, but at Microsoft, we spend at least as much time figuring out what we're going to do with those insights. I mean, it was interesting hearing these examples here about going out and getting mortgage advisors. As I look at all these analytics, what we spend a lot of time on is if we identify a deal, for example, as high risk, if it gets triggered as high risk for certain risk attributes, these are the specific concrete steps that we're asking people to take to manage that risk, to address what we found in the analytics. And that's how we're going about it. And as I talk about it, again, technology is amazing, but figuring out how to actually operationalize it and build it into the business process is at least as that big a lift, if not bigger.
Right, but you know, Donald, let me throw one other thing out. I mean, I think everybody hears the story of big data and how big data is great. Big data really works well in financial transactions, credit card transactions, and manufacturing, where the manufacturing line runs 24 hours a day, you're making tens of thousands of products, and you can begin to look at the small anomalies that occur and begin to say, in the credit card transaction, you're doing 20 million transactions an hour, you can look for small anomalies. You're one of the largest companies in the world, and you're working 800 cases, right? There isn't enough incident data. Nobody is saying that you shouldn't look at the incident data. The problem and why I moved from incident data, I've had a long history in the ethics and compliance space with case management and data, and I couldn't make it work because in essence, I feel like that a lot of ethics and compliance misconduct is random. It's to your point of the fact the guy can't pay his mortgage, so he's scratching his head and saying, how am I going to do that? That pressure shifted it. It wasn't anything other than that bad choice, right? So how do I begin to look at that? Because I can't look at the data. There aren't 17,000 of those cases to me to apply to be able to get that down to where that I have that analytical side of it. So what we're dealing with now is, from my perspective at ECI, we're deploying semantic listening. We're trying to listen more carefully to what people are saying in the culture around their emotions and that resilience that they're building. And we're watching carefully the trends of the actual things that are going on. And then it's an art project, right, of trying to put those two pieces together.
I mean, just to add on to this, as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest challenges is basically the sheer amount of volume in terms of cases, incidents that you're processing. That's why incorporating your approach and basically bringing in sanitized data from other departments will give you even better, even more pointed analytics. Yeah. So that's why I think it is still important to collect that information. I think it is still important to look into root cause analysis. We all know how to investigate. We know what questions to ask during investigations. But at the end of investigation, we have to pause and then think about it. What actually drove that person to do this? Ask that question. Find out from them in their own words, what was the main driver? Find out if there were other influences from the outside of company. Maybe it was something internal. Maybe it was basically, as I mentioned, in one case, it was the economic situation. In the other, it was the compensation schema that did not work. And those data points connected into it with a proper algorithm will give you a much more accurate predictions that will allow you to basically tailor your training, address those specific groups that you believe could be at risk of engaging in misconduct. And
I think to the point of the 800 cases, I think you're right. Bringing in outside additional data is key, and part of that integration strategy, to overuse the term ethics at the center, moving the ethics systems into the center of the business world. So you're pulling the other data in, whether it's HR data, whether it's accounts payable, invoices, payments, salary, whatever information you need.
Travel
information, exactly. So doing that. The other piece we have that we've started looking at is disclosures, because we're seeing a far higher number of disclosures coming out of organizations and cases. So it's another source of a rich data set that's available for analysis.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, how many people here actually look at exit interviews, right? I mean, I mean, if you're not, you're missing a huge data source. And if you could get to where your exit interviews actually had some data point components to it, and you started bringing that back in, it's a huge advantage, because those are the people that are leaving their company. Why? What are they feeling? Are they feeling pressure? Are they feeling this or that? You can learn a lot from your exit interviews.
And this was something you were saying about doing some of the kind of sentiment analysis and emotional analysis and things.
Right.
You can extract that from the data in the exit interview. You can find key terms that people use that give an indication if they're happy or unhappy, or if it's a positive or negative churn, and you could build that in. But one of the dangers in data analytics is just assuming that somehow correlation is causation. And we get told this again and again, that these things are not the same. Knowing that something is correlated, knowing that there's a correlation between the economy and something that's happening in the organization doesn't mean that that's what's causing it. In many ways, rather than talking about artificial intelligence in these cases, you might want to talk about augmented intelligence. We're taking, the data becomes a way of informing human beings, and we're extending our capability of understanding what's going on because we have the data and because we have the analytics. But as a product guy, Philip, I mean, what does this spark in your mind? Are you?
Well, there's so many applications for us, and it goes back to there's several things. One is getting the information distilled down to something that's consumable, because there is, as you said, the data goes through the sort of up to wisdom and then power or knowledge. How do you take all of these data points, distill it down into something that's consumable, and then give it to you at the time that you need it? And for us, from a product standpoint, it's looking at the integrations that we need. So what are the other data sources we want to bring in, both from the enterprise space, so what do you have within your organization, plus data from outside, because you want to look at, there's geopolitical influences that have massive impacts on organizations as well. So pulling all of that together, but then with that data, giving the ethics and compliance industry the tools they need to easily consume it. Right? As you mentioned, you don't want to have a team of data scientists working in your organization. We want to give you the tools that derive that intelligence and then deliver it back to you in consumable format, whether that's in the analytics that you're building within your programs, whether it's on a mobile device, or whether it's pushing it back into the enterprise space. So as you're approving an expense claim, there's a flag saying this is high risk from your compliance system. Those sorts of things. So it's getting it all integrated into the corporate fabric.
I think one thing too, Philip, that comes in that is I think that what we're all talking about begins to arm the ethics and compliance professional with tools. One of the tools that it also offers, which has been fleeting, if you will, for compliance professionals for a long time, is an ability to go in and really talk to your boss, to your CEO, to your board about those. So the analytics as you move forward, not only is it consumable by the compliance professional, it's in a form that's consumable by the board or by your CEO to really understand what you're trying to accomplish and where your company is in terms of its ethics compliance posture.
Just to have the ability to face the audit committee or senior executives when they ask the question on a quarterly basis, is it getting better or worse, and how do we know? Right. And be able to do it in a manner that's consumable to them would be incredibly powerful. If we could crack that nut, that'd be pretty amazing. The other part is what I found out with doing some of this work in creating the content this way is how the perspective matters in terms of how we present the data. What I mean by that is I'm looking at it from a compliance perspective, and I may be sharing it out with our stakeholders. Hey, these are our risky deals from a compliance perspective. But when I share it with business leaders, it's like, hey, that's really interesting, Alan, but why are those partners structuring all of their deals that way? And just the fact that this data, once you have it in this sort of format, can be consumed in different ways, different perspectives, gives us increased value.
Right. I'm always very keen on the idea that data is just the start of a conversation. Mm-hmm. In fact, even better, it's the start of a debate with an organization.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, and that's how you need to look at it. Using data to basically make informed decisions, and then take that over to your leadership and discuss this with them. Make this easy for them to consume as well. Having a quarterly report that's basically 5 pages of words is not going to get that message across. Think about how you can visualize the information, how you can deliver it quicker. And we're trying to do this. Whether we're successful or not, we're going to find out. But I mean, the idea is to remove as much wording as possible out of our report, replace them with a visualization, and deliver the message that way. It's a lot easier to process. And if there are questions based on it, don't worry, the SMT and the board members will ask.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because data and visualization often get conflated into one idea. They are two separate things, but you need both.
Yes.
Without the visualization, I mean, it tells the story. And at the end of the day, you need to be able to tell a story very quickly, very succinctly. So having the right visualizations that support whatever hypothesis that you've proven succinctly is key.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Well, this has been a tremendous discussion. I want to make sure that we have a little time for you to ask any questions, because it's a great opportunity to have a panel with such experience and such expertise up here. So does anybody have any particular questions you would like answered? We got some?
Microphones.
Right there.
Yeah. Okay, right, sorry. Somebody's rushing to you with a microphone right now.
Hi, Michal. For Philip Morris, when you talked about going to your operators and discussing what you discovered, did they embrace that? Did they make a change? And were you able to see from an analytical perspective how it changed your statistics for your staff?
No, absolutely. I mean, the big thing about it is if you actually think about the problem, if you take the data, analyze it, you basically come to conclusions, and you know how to deliver that information to your stakeholders, you're going to get their buy-in. The idea is basically have your story ready, and the data and analysis behind it is going to allow you to basically have that story. And we are in a very fortunate situation at Philip Morris International. Our general counsel and our chief compliance officer put a significant highlight on basically multidisciplinary approach. Therefore, we not only look at compliance from the perspective of compliance, but we actually bring in other disciplines into this. And through doing this, it allows us to basically have a little bit of a better conversations with our business partners. I mean, one of the books that I'm reading right now is an engineering book. And why would a compliance person read an engineering book? It has a very unique look at the root cause analysis and basically how to implement that into your program to avoid basically repeating the same problem.
I think this happens a lot, by the way, that once you start looking at data, and once you start looking at your business from a data and analytics perspective, the cross-fertilization across different departments becomes very, very dynamic. You start to learn from all sorts of different parts of the business. You begin to discover that one department has parallel problems conceptually that can be modeled in similar ways to other departments. You start to learn across the entire business. It's a very powerful tool in that sense.
I want to go back to one thing that came up yesterday in Renee's discussion. I mean, the one slide just stuck out in my head was the difference between the three companies that she showed, that if they were performing at a higher ethical level, that their market share would all be worth $4 or $5 billion more, right? Let's put a very practical hat on. What we're talking about today is our journey of trying to figure this out. But what we're also telling you is that data is a competitive advantage. And if you're not using it to your advantage, you're missing a huge opportunity to dig in and be able to figure it out. And Renee's data point yesterday can show you that there's a dramatic ROI to making the investment in time and energy to get to the point that you have better data analytics around your business and around what you're trying to achieve.
Right. Any other questions? I can't. Oh yes, one here in the middle.
So I know some companies do robust insider threat type monitoring, and I loved what you were talking about, Michal, about the, understand and prevent kind of thing. But is there any intersection between that type of insider threat behavior analysis with what you're doing?
So I would love to say yes. We're trying. We're not there yet. We're trying to bring in other data sources, take a look at it, maturity level of management, things like that, HR sources, trying to bring in actually travel and entertainment into our analysis to basically identify those groups and the problems. As I've mentioned, we are very fortunate with a great general counsel and chief compliance officer, but we do still have limited resources. And that's why we rely on help from people like Philip, like Patrick, and Convercent to help us out with this. So we're not there yet. We're hoping to be there in a short period of time.
Did you have any comments on that, Alan? It's kind of relevant, I think, in the Microsoft space as well.
Yeah, for us, my work in the compliance analytics space is really focused on a handful of specific risks. We, as Microsoft, as you can imagine, we have a whole nother team that is dealing with a lot of the insider threats and the sorts of risks that we face in this space. You can imagine that we have a very robust program around it.
Right. Great. Well, I want to thank you all for. There's one more question? Two more questions, and we've got time for one. So you guys can. One person.
Is this on? Okay.
Yep.
I know that HR is going through a similar effort with looking at data to help drive better human resources decisions. And so I'm wondering, particularly with ethics being at the center and impacting behavior, are you seeing more collaboration or integration with HR? Because that's really area of expertise that they have is around human behavior and how to transform it, and particularly the culture of the company.
So, to David's point, the culture is a huge aspect of or should be a huge aspect of your compliance program. We actually do work with our HR department. We do take into account the surveys that they do, the cultural pulses. In addition to that, we actually also create our own survey that's more of a compliance focus. And in return, we actually share that information as well with HR. So for us at Philip Morris, it is an important part, and HR is an important partner for us.
And in our data set, there is a complete section that is fed from HR-based data. And in many cases, we look for a direct API into the HRIS system so that we're extracting turnover data and stuff on a weekly basis.
And there's a panel this afternoon that's talking a little bit about the culture of trust, I want to say, and Aaron TC from Microsoft. It will be able to specifically answer a question about some of the work that we're doing with HR around some of these issues.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Our time is up. Thank you for our panel members. I think that's been a fantastic discussion. I hope you've enjoyed it.